exhibit in the Capitol just the other day. With that, I'm pleased to yield the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for your leadership. That display that you and I looked on together earlier is just, it would not be but for you. Cheryl Johnson, that we appreciate so much, who had enough good sense to marry a guy from South Carolina. She too appreciates you, and we appreciate the good work that she has done putting that exhibit together. Let me say a couple of things about Joseph Rainey that the speaker did not allude to. She mentioned that he was born into slavery in Georgetown, South Carolina. That used to be, when I first got elected, Georgetown was in my congressional district. It's not after redistricting, but he did, his family, his father was a barber. And his father, with money he earned as a barber. And even during slavery, slaves were allowed to keep some of the money that they earned. His father saved up enough money from the barbering to purchase his family's freedom. And Joseph Rainey, if my memory serves, was born in 1932. That freedom was purchased, 1832, and that freedom was purchased in 1840. But the family later moved to Charleston. And it was there in Charleston that they continued to live free now. And when the Civil War broke out, he was conscripted into the Confederate Army. So in 1861, he was in the Army fighting for the Confederacy against his will. And so he escaped. He and his wife escaped and went to Bermuda and stayed in Bermuda, where slavery had been outlawed. And he stayed there until after the war was over and returned to Charleston in 1866. And in 1868, Rainey participated in the Constitutional Convention. It's kind of interesting about that Constitutional Convention that he participated in. They drew up a state constitution. And at that convention, Robert Smalls was also there. And Robert Smalls introduced a resolution to provide for free public education for all South Carolinians, because up until that time, of course, education was reserved for the elite. And so when Joseph Rainey got elected to Congress and was sworn in on December 12th, 1870, he introduced as one of his first pieces of legislation the requirement for public education for all. So Robert Smalls introduced the resolution in the Constitutional Convention of 1868, but it was Joseph Rainey that put it into legislation in the Congress after he was elected. It's kind of interesting because Rainey served for 8 years, from 1870 all the way down to 78, because something interesting happened in 1877. It was in 1877 that Reverend B. Hayes, the infamous, I would say, Tilden Hayes Compromise, brought an end to Reconstruction. Now, we hear a lot of talk about all the African Americans that served in Congress during Reconstruction. A lot of them did, but Reconstruction ended in 1877. So most of those people you read about actually got elected to Congress after Reconstruction. And they were serving in Congress all the way up in South Carolina until 1897. When George Washington Murray left the Congress, forced out in 1897 for the next 95 years. no African American representation until I was elected in 1992 for 95 years. But I've always literally worshiped Joseph Rainey. All of those 8 African Americans that served in Congress from 1870 to 1897. So usually when I'm sort of introduced going around the stage, people will say Jim Clyburn, the first African American in Congress, even when they say since Reconstruction. I kind of politely figure out a way to correct that. In fact, I'm working now on the 3rd book, and I'm calling it Before I Was First, There Were 8. And it all started with Joseph Rainey. So I want to thank the Speaker and the Clerk for putting together this display that's going to be around for about a year. I hope we can get beyond this pandemic soon so that people can come here to Washington and look at this display, because she's added a little wrinkle to it that I think all of you would be interested in. She has a little part there. You can press the button and you can see the first African American to be elected to Congress from every one of the states, including the District of Columbia, the territories as well, and the Virgin Islands. And you get a good sense of the history that I love so much. If you were to come to my office and come up in the elevator, when you step up the elevator, the first big portrait you will see is a copy of the portrait of Joseph Rainey that hangs here in this Capitol. And you walk down the hallway, you see one of Shirley Chisholm, the first African American woman who came many, many years later. And you see one of the first Latina to serve here in the Congress, and another one of the first woman to serve here in the Congress. So I worship these first because I think it gives us a good sense of who and what we are, of where we were, how far we need to go in order to get us to where we need to be. So this resolution that we will be introducing today is an honor of this great man and his legacy. I hope we'll get it passed tomorrow, so it'll be a part of the record before the anniversary day, which will be Saturday, December 12th. So I want to thank the Speaker for her sensitivity to this and all she's done, not just to help in this instance, but all she's done to help me honor the people of South Carolina, as I try to do every day. Now I'm gonna close with a little bit of controversy. I often say to my friends up here on the Hill that I think I can make the case legitimately that South Carolina is the most historic state in our union. My friends from Virginia may not like it, and Massachusetts may disagree with it. But if they sit down around the table with me, I think I can win that argument. And so this is another indication of how historic people in place of South Carolina are today. So I want to thank you, Madam Speaker, once again, and we'll answer the questions you may have.
Thank you, Whip Clyburn, and thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for your opening remarks. At this time, we will now open the floor for questions. As a friendly reminder, to ask a question, simply indicate that you would like to speak using the chat feature. I will then call on you and you may unmute and ask your question. Please ensure that you direct your question to either the Speaker or the Whip and announce your name and your outlet. And again, at this time, we are only taking questions pertaining to the topics we just spoke about. So at this time, Kelly Meyer, you may unmute and ask your question.
There's a picture.
So thank you so much for taking my question. This would be for Whip Clyburn and also Madam Speaker. Wanted to get a sense of how you think Rainey would look at the work of Congress today, especially when it comes to racial equality. Would he want to see more done? And how do you want to reflect that in your work in the new Congress?
Thank you so much for your question. Before I respond to it, though, I want to say to Mr. Clyburn that whatever the argument is about South Carolina being the most historic state, in his leadership in Congress, he is adding to that historic record to make it so very persuasively. I also want to acknowledge that I'm in a different place now because they put me here to be in the same, but if I were in my own office, I also have Mary McLeod Bethune and W.B. Du Bois in my office, as you do over your shoulder, with great pride. And I think that's Lyndon Johnson over there. And
Absolutely.
I remember being there.
And Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall from Baltimore. So I feel very close to Thurgood Marshall. But also just to be there, I'm a native Baltimorean, but take great pride in Thurgood Marshall. Our airport is named for him. But the Lyndon Johnson Award, when I saw you get that award for liberty and justice for all. And that takes me back to the question. For liberty and justice for all, I think Joseph Rainey would think that we could have done more, that we shouldn't be having to have a fight over the Voting Rights Act, which passed before overwhelmingly bipartisan with Mr. Clyburn's leadership. The court undid some of that, and now we have resistance on the other side of the aisle to passing that bill. We will persist in the new Congress with it's called now the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and Mr. Clyburn was taking the lead on making sure that that would happen. I think he would say that when it comes to justice, liberty and justice for all, that we have a much more work to do, whether it's economic justice, health justice, whether it's environmental justice, as I mentioned earlier, or justice in our judicial system. Mr. Clyburn is always fond of quoting Dr. King, who said of all the forms of injustice, the injustice in the health is one of the most inhuman because people could die. So this has been part of the civil rights movement, justice, liberty and justice for all. So I would say, because we're never satisfied, but because we do have a long way to go. As I said, President Obama's book is called The Promised Land, and we have many more promises to keep. Mr. Clyburn?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You're absolutely correct about Rainey's efforts when he was elected to Congress. His education was one responsibility, and he was actually put in charge of all of those issues relating to the formerly enslaved people. That was his congressional duty and responsibility as a member of this body that you and I both serve in. So he would be consciously working to make the greatness of this country accessible and affordable for all. So I think the speaker is absolutely correct. He would be very passionate about this work, and he would recognize how much we needed to do because he was there at the beginning, and he knows that many false starts have been made, and we're always looking to repair whatever breaches may occur. And COVID-19 has opened up some significant breaches in our system. I call them fault lines because I do believe that part of our responsibility is repair the faults that we find, as Alexis Tocqueville said, it was really the hallmark of this country. Not that we're more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because we always have been able to repair our faults. And so he would be working to repair the fault lines that have been developed as a result of COVID-19 and other things that did and did not happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly, for your question. At this time, I'll do one last ask. If anybody else has questions pertaining to Joseph Rainey or the resolution or anything else we talked about so far, please indicate so in the chat. So we'll give you another second to indicate that. Otherwise, we will move on to news of the day.
Well, if I may, if there are no other questions, let me say one last thing about the historical part of this. The speaker mentioned this little bus back here of Mary McLeod Bethune. I don't know if it's well known now, but as a lot of people know, each state is allowed to put 2 statues here in the Capitol. And Mary McLeod Bethune's statue, I would like to call it her likeness, is on the way here, but not from South Carolina, where she was born and raised in a little town of Maysville, South Carolina, educated in North Carolina, taught school in South Carolina, taught in Georgia, ended up living in Florida, and she founded what's known today as Bethune-Cookman College. So the people of Florida have decided that they are going to remove that Confederate general that they have up here as one of their statues and replace it with Mary McLeod Bethune, another historical aspect of South Carolina, because it will be the first time that a state, now we've got Rosa Parks here and others, Tubman and others, but all of them were put there by Congress. This is going to be the first time that a state has sent a person of color to represent them in our nation's capital.
If I may, Mr. Clyburn, follow up on that, because the state of Florida and our members here, Kathy Castor and other members from Florida, have taken a tremendous interest in it, and they've given me pictures every step of the way of the cast that was formed. The marble from Italy, Ferrara, Italy, the same marble that Michelangelo carved in will be carving the statue of Mary Bethune, Mary McLeod Bethune. But I'll move over to her partner, D.B. Du Bois, and talk about when we in Ghana visited his grave together.
Absolutely.
And how historic that was to see the connection. Clyburn led us in a delegation to Ghana last year, 15 months ago or so, for the 400th anniversary of the first slaves to leave, people to leave Africa, and they would become slaves in the U.S. It was the 400th anniversary. It was very exciting. Then when we had visited Ghana before, we were going through the door of no return. Now we had, with John Lewis with us, the door of return, asking people to come back and see their roots. And again, when we were in Ghana, we went to the grave and the museum, really, of D.B. Du Bois. So we're also connected in so many experiences. But the more Mr. Clyburn teaches us about this, including South Carolina, where my daughter's godfather is from, so we all have our connections. And the more appreciation, the more pride we take, and the more we want other people to know. Thank you, Mr. Clyburn, for making this part of who we are as Americans better known.
Thank you.
Give us hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Madam Speaker, I know you have to go shortly. We do have one more question on Joseph Rainey, if you can stick around for a quick second. Jaron, I believe I pronounced that correctly. You may unmute and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. Proud Floridian here, so appreciate this recap. I'm reporting with the GRIO, and my question is, in terms of John Rainey's legacy and his work focusing on civil rights, I was wondering for Whip Clyburn and Speaker Pelosi, are there any issues that Rainey addressed that you feel are particularly enduring to this modern day, and that you feel that younger generations would benefit from knowing about?
Well, first I must say,
Go ahead, Madam Speaker.
Excuse me, you go, Mr. Bird. I would just say, because Mr. Clyburn will have the answer, I will have a response. And that is that when you see his story, you see a story of courage, of responsibility, of knowing his presence is not just about him, but about a people and about history, about the history that he was making. But not only did he want to make history, he wanted to make progress. And so it's about the larger meaning of his coming to Congress And as Mr. Clyburn said earlier, education, education, education. It is key to everything in terms of recognizing the innate talent of everyone and letting that blossom, about the equalizer it is in our society, the leveler of giving people more opportunity, and how that education and an informed population is central to a democracy. So in his service, he not only gave hope to so many people, showed his courage and his commitment, but he made America more American with that leadership.
The speaker is absolutely right about that. I know that you've got to leave, Minister. Let me give a quick answer to that. You are absolutely correct. Rainey was denied formal education as all slaves were. His father taught him barbering. And when he came back from Bermuda, he and his wife, he did come to Philadelphia and married a lady from Philadelphia. And I think they had 3 children, Joseph, Herbert, and Olive, and went back to South Carolina. But education that he was denied, he insisted that it be there for others. And if he were here today, he would recognize that we are inadequately educating our children, especially in rural communities. He was from Georgetown, a rural community. And although everybody think of Charleston as being downtown Charleston or the peninsula, Charleston has much more agricultural than it has anything else. And it's rural, most of that county is. So he would be working on these issues if he were here today, and he would also be working to get the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act passed to restore the protections of the Voting Rights Act that we have not had for the last 8 years. We would not be seeing what we're seeing today if we had the protections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which was gutted 8 years ago with a Supreme Court decision in Shelby v. Holder.
If I just may add one more thing, because Mr. Clyburn reminds me, almost 5 years, more than 5 years ago, it'll be 6, I guess, in January, or well, 5 years from December 31st, Mr. Clyburn and I and a group of members, actually in bipartisan way, went to the archives to be there at midnight when the bell rang and the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. It was so exciting. But why I bring it up is because in preparation, in the course of the evening that night, they had testimony from slaves, former slaves, soon to be free slaves, and Harriet Tubman and others. The story was so fabulous because it wasn't as if people were enslaved and now they were free only. They were ready for freedom. They knew what freedom's possibilities were. Their communications among themselves, the communications with others outside meant that immediately America would be blessed. America would be blessed with this infusion of people ready, understanding freedom, the price of it, and the rest. And then it wasn't that much longer, another couple months, that was the first inauguration of a president that Black folk would come to an inauguration as free people with the second inaugural of Lincoln, with malice toward none and charity toward all. So what I find exciting is what was happening during slavery to prepare for this great infusion into our country when that moment came. So I thank you all, Mr. Congressman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm honored to be part of this. However you want to proceed and further recognition of Joseph Rainey in the Capitol, I feel prepared to follow your lead on that. And I give you credit for setting this all up, teaching us in a whole new way about South Carolina.
Thank you very much. I know you've got another meeting.
But I do want you to let, I will take your lead on whatever other form of respect that you think should be shown, but in any manifestation by naming or whatever you decide. It's up to you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. You will
Thank
hear
you.
from me very soon.
I'm
Maybe
sure.
before we go home tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank
Are there any questions about other things beyond this? I'm available.
Yes, sir. So we have a little bit of time for a few more questions. Again, indicate in the chat, please, if you do have a question for Whip Clyburn. Meg Kennard, you may unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Whip Clyburn, for doing this. Really appreciate it. I want to visit with you for a moment about what's going on with some of President-elect Biden's picks, particularly for the Department of Agriculture. You've talked a lot about Marcia Fudge for that slot, and she's been nominated to fill another one. So I wonder about your thoughts on her at HUD, and then also bringing back Tom Vilsack to the Department of Agriculture.
Well, as you know, I pushed hard for Marcia Fudge to go to Ag, and the reason for that is because she chaired a very critical subcommittee on the Agricultural Committee. And the fact of the matter is 75 to 80% of what the Department of Agriculture is all about goes beyond farming. When you look at the SNAP programs, these nutrition programs, housing, broadband, these are all big things under Ag. And I just felt that the Department of Agriculture's focus is too much on the big farming interests and trade and the impact that agriculture has on Wall Street. I want to see more of an emphasis of the Department of Agriculture on Main Street and No Name Road. That's what I wanted to see. And I thought that she had the background for that. But it's the president's elect's choice to make. He has decided he would like to have his longtime personal friend back at the department, and he spoke with Marcia Fudge about HUD, and because they're in HUD, a lot of the other things like housing is there, so much, and I think these opportunity zones that used to be there and other things that's been taken away. I understand from my discussions with her that the president-elect will be bringing all that back to HUD. See, opportunity zones, as many of you know, I saw Jamie on here earlier, he may not be here now, but I have always been talking about opportunity zones and how they ought to be utilized rather than giving tax breaks to wealthy developers. The opportunity zones ought to focus on the people who live in the zones. And I understand that they have been talking about that, and that's going to be a part of her portfolio at HUD. And so she's pleased with that. And so if Marcia's pleased, I'm happy.
Do you think there are any concerns, though, in terms of bringing back someone who, for a long time, led the Department of Agriculture in Secretary Vilsack, that some of those necessary changes may be harder to implement when you bring someone back who ran the department himself for quite a long time?
Well, as you might imagine, I've had a long talk with Mr. Vilsack. He knows of what my concerns were, and we have talked through them, and I think we are going to have a pretty good working relationship going forward. He understands what I'm talking about, and he knows that I'm not talking about Jim Clyburn's personal interests. I've never lived on a farm. I've never lived in rural America. But I represent a lot of farms, small farms. I represent a lot of rural places. I was married for 58 years to a young lady who, young and older lady, who grew up on a farm and knows what it's like to walk 2.5 miles to school in the morning, simply because they were not allowed to have buses for her to go to school with. So I know that experience very well. And I've shared all of that with Secretary Vilsack. So I think we got a good understanding as to how we're going to be working together going forward to make this department more than an interest of Wall Street.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Our next question is from Brenda Hudson. Brenda, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Paul Cobb. I'm using Brenda Hudson's Zoom site because I am technologically deficient. And
join the club.
So there are two Brendas. Brenda Hudson is adjacent to me. I'm the publisher of the Oakland Post. I've had the pleasure of interviewing James Clyburn when he visited Oakland, and also published his photo together. I want to ask Brother Clyburn if he has considered tying a national campaign with the Black media to get blacks involved in the vaccine by using Black history and the motivation of the contributions of Rainey and John Lewis and others, of showing that it's a Black patriotic tradition to make sure that we stay healthy. Have you considered trying to tie those two issues together with an initiative from the Black Caucus and with Speaker Pelosi?
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much for helping out so much with my last visit to Oakland. I've seen you every time that I've come out there with Ms. Lee, and I thank you for that. Let me just say a couple of things. You know a little bit about my background, and I always say that people are no more or less than what their experiences allow them to be. And I used to be in your business. And so I know how tough it is. And I know what your duties and responsibilities are. And you raise an issue that I think I'm trying to get people to understand. The Black media operates different from what we call the mainstream media. It operates through churches and community groups. Their distribution takes place on Sunday mornings. In our churches and on Saturdays in our synagogues and temples. And that's what the distribution is. You don't get Arbitron ratings simply because that's not the way that you connect with your public. But you also have a great appreciation for the history of African Americans. And I need not tell you what the experience was like with the polio vaccine.
Yes.
You recall there were two vaccines. One was the Salk vaccine and one was the Sabin vaccine. The Salk vaccine was a shot in the arm. The Sabin vaccine was a drop of serum on a lump of sugar. I still got that scar from the Salk vaccine. And guess where the Sabin vaccine went? Who would rather have the shot over the lump of sugar? So we are going to be working on that to make sure that equity takes place in the distribution of this vaccine. And we are going to remind people of the leadership that's required of us. Because you also remember from your studies, like I do, of the Tuskegee experiment.
Yes.
And what that did to Black people, including me. I'll never forget learning about that and what it did to me. I still get emotional when I think about that. And so I'm working on that. We're going to make sure that equity takes place in the distribution, and I chair the select subcommittee that oversees that. And we are going to make sure that we provide the kind of leadership so that the people in the Black community and other communities as well get comfortable with this. I've told President-elect Joe Biden that when the time comes, I'm going to be very public taking the vaccine. So I want to set myself as an example because this virus is nothing to play with. Irrespective of what may be said by the current occupant of the White House, this is a serious, serious virus. And I read last night and heard again this morning that there's another unexplained illness taking place out there, and there's a fear that something else may be on the horizon. And so we've got to be careful going forward. And I'm going to be very diligent, and I'm going to try to set the example.
All right, we have time for one final question. Regina Wilson, you can unmute and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Representative Clyburn. Regina Wilson here with California Black Media, and we have heard a lot of different talks. I've been in a lot of different meetings with African-American women in the state of California as well as nationally. We all know that Vice President Harris is left to open or vacancy. And in California, there's a real push, and obviously it's becoming between a lot of different groups, but having the absence is that what they're saying is having the absence of having an African-American woman in the Senate. Do you think that it will have grave consequences for any of our electeds that are not, that don't really take heed to that very seriously? We know we saw the power of your endorsement in South Carolina, which is a road and a map to the presidency. So what do you think we should be doing, or have you been able to speak out? I know that you're not in California, but have you, has this been brought to your attention at all, that urging our leaders in California, maybe that they really want to think about having an absence of Black women in the Senate, given the fact that they're relying on them through the presidency to get to the presidency, as well as Georgia, like just looking at what's going to happen in Georgia and what the need is for Black women to really turn out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you may not know, I'm the father of 3 Black women, one of whom just got elected, was a leading vote getter to my school board there in our capital city of Columbia. All 3 of those women are very active politically. That's the youngest who just got elected. The oldest is Mignon, who you may know, yes, who just served 9 years on the Federal Communications Commission. And we were in business together, owning a newspaper down in Charleston. We decided we could go broke just as quick doing something else. So I know the value of women. The endorsement that I made, you mentioned the endorsement. It was Emily Clyburn speaking through me. She told me about 3 or 4 weeks before she passed away that our best bet to win this election was Joe Biden. She said that to me. And on about 4 or 5 days before I made the endorsement, it was a Black woman at St. John's Baptist Church, a rural part of Richland County, who called me over to her with a beckon of her finger and told me, after she asked me who was I going to vote for, when I told her, she looked in my face with a look that I cannot explain. And she said to me, I needed to hear that, and this community needed to hear from you. So Black women play a critical role in everything that I do and say. And I would love to see a Black woman replace our Vice President-elect. I've made that known to everybody. In fact, the Wall Street Journal asked me about that this morning. And I said the same thing to them that I'm saying to you, except I went a little bit further. And I mentioned 2 Black women that I know, Barbara Lee and Karen Bass, 2 outstanding women, either one of whom will make outstanding Congresspeople. And now that my former colleague, who I thought might be angling for that position, the current Attorney General, Javier Becerra, will be coming here as a part of this administration. So I have no conflict, except that which exists between these 2 outstanding Black women.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining today's call, and this recording will be made available to y'all shortly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Morgan.